Welcome back to Chef G's Kitchen. Today we're going to be doing a chicken marsala, which is a very delicious preparation. There are a couple of objectives we have here. The first objective is to learn about the poultry that we're using, which is a chicken breast. We should be familiar at this point in time with the characteristics of chicken, and we're going to give a little special handling to the chicken as we go along in this process. The other thing we'll be learning is an integral sauce, and an integral sauce, as you know, is made from the drippings or the fond, which is the little particles that stick in the pan from the cooking of the product, and then it's usually deglazed with a wine. In this case, it's going to be a Marsala wine. So there are a few things we have to go over. We'll go over our mise en place, and then we'll go over our cooking methods as we go along. So let's look at the mise en place. So here is our mise en place. We have kosher salt, which is a granular salt that we'll be using. We have our kosher salt here. We have ground pepper. You can use fresh ground if you prefer. We have all-purpose flour, which we'll be using for our sauce. We have butter, which we'll be using for the sauce. We have mushrooms. We have the minced shallots. And we have thyme, fresh thyme. And I've already prepared the fresh thyme, and I've put it in this little plastic package. We're all ready to go with the thyme. And last but not least, we have our flour for dredging our cutlets. We also have our cutlets who are in the refrigerator, and we'll be getting to those in a minute. But we want to think about the Marsala wine that we're using. This Marsala wine, it's a very sweet wine. It's very comparable to a sherry or a port wine, but this is the Italian version. If you're doing this process at home, you do not need a high quality wine for making the sauce. So for making the sauce, you can buy a relatively inexpensive wine. This bottle actually cost $5.99. And this is our Marsala wine here, and you can see what a nice color it has. So that's basically our mise en place. One other thing about mise en place, or a few other things. First of all, if the mushrooms are, a little bit dirty, sometimes they're packaged with a little bit of dirt from the mushroom farm. So you just take a toothbrush and under some warm but not hot water, lukewarm water, just scrub the mushroom off and you get all that dirt off. And then you can prepare to slice the mushrooms as you go along. The other thing is in the mise en place is this particular pan that we're using. Now, it's an aluminum pan, and the reason we're using the aluminum pan is because we want to create a fond. If you use a non-stick pan, you will not have the fond, the little bits of particles that remain after you saute. And without those particles, you lose some of the essence of the flavor. The other thing too that I didn't mention in the mise en place is we have oil by the stove. We'll be using the oil. So, without further ado, let's get into the process of preparing for this dish. Okay, so here are our chicken breasts, and I have already filleted this chicken breast, and I have them in a 1-gallon plastic bag. What's good about the 1-gallon plastic bag is that you can actually use the bag to pound these cutlets. I forgot to mention in the mise en place, you will need a meat mallet or the bottom of a saucepan, or you could even use a cleaver if you have one to flatten these out. And that's just to get a nice even thickness to the cutlet. Now if you get a meat mallet, you can see that one side is plain and the other side is kind of like spiked. the spike size is if you're tenderizing. If you're tenderizing the meat, you'll use the spike size. But for this particular preparation, the chicken, I don't need to really tenderize it. The breast is a fairly tender piece of meat, so I'll just use this edge to flatten it. So the neat aspect of this 1 gallon plastic bag is that I'm going to cut the sides of the bag like so. You could do this with a scissor too, if you prefer. Just open it up. Now I have my 2 portions of cutlet here, chicken breast. Just close the flap, like so, and I'll take my mallet and I'll begin to pound the cutlets. Now, you do not need a lot of pounding here. Pretty tender piece of meat, just until you get it nice and even, about 1/4 of an inch thick. And I'll take this piece here and I'll do the very same thing. Okay. Now these are ready to actually begin the preparation for cooking. So I'm using my vinyl gloves here as I'm touching chicken. Be very careful with chicken because there are safety guidelines, sanitation guidelines for chicken. You want to make sure you don't splash your chicken all over the place. Okay, so in the description that I sent to you online, there are several ways that we can approach this. We can salt and pepper these, season them, dredge them in flour, and proceed. There are alternative ways of dealing with this. We have dry brining and wet brining. So wet brining would be if I made a salt solution and covered these cutlets in the solution overnight. The other thing would be a dry brine where I sprinkle a little bit of salt on the cutlet and leave them in the plastic bag overnight. What's the purpose of brining? It's to keep moisture in the meat so that as you cook it, the meat doesn't dry out. So, be careful, do not over brine because that would be salting. Salting draws water out, but just a little bit of salt for a dry brining technique would actually help the water content and the flavor stay in the meat. In this case, we're just going to season the cutlets, dredge them, and then take them to the stove to saute them. Now, in many preparations, in many restaurants, they don't saute, they pan fry, or they deep fry. There are different structures to the taste when you do that. So just be aware that we are using the sauteing technique. So let's season the cutlets. Sprinkle a little salt on each side, a little of the kosher salt, a little pepper, not too much, we're not about to kill these. I'm going to turn them over. Do the same thing on the other side, a little bit of salt, and a little bit of pepper. And we're about ready to go. So I will now dredge the cutlets in my flour. Here's my flour. And I'm just going to lightly dredge them, like so. And shake the excess off. And I'll do the same thing with this cutlet. Dredge them in flour. And shake the excess off. and we're ready to go to the stove to saute the cutlets. Now, just remember, once you've used this flour, unless you're going to use it again rather quickly, then you must discard this flour. Don't try to use it for anything else again, because it's already been contaminated with the chicken. Okay, so let's move to the stove and move to the cooking process. So, as you can see, the oil is kind of smoking. It's ready to go. I had it on high heat. Now I've lowered it to medium, even though in the text or in the document that I sent to you, it said to saute these at high heat. So we are going to do these at medium heat, about 1.5 minutes on each side. How do I know when these are finished? Well, they should be a little bit brown, and they should be firm. Okay, so you can see that there's browning on the one side, so I'm just sauteing to get a little browning on the other side. So as you can see, the cutlets are nice and brown. The other side is brown a little bit. We have nice browning on that side. And I'll take them off the pan and put them aside. And now you can see in the pan, you can see the little bits are formed in the bottom of the pan. And that's good, because that's exactly what I need for the sauce. So in the next segment, let's do the sauce, an integral sauce derived from this element of form that we have in the pan. So I need a little bit more oil in my pan, so I'm going to add a little dab of oil. It's nice to have your oil in a squirt bottle. It comes in handy. And I'm going to turn the pan up to high heat to warm the oil up again. And then I'll begin sauteing my mushrooms. I added my teaspoon or tablespoon of butter and with my oil, and I'm going to reduce the heat to medium, and I will add my mushrooms. Okay, and I need to wait until my mushrooms brown. I'm going to swirl them around in the pan and coat them with the oil and the butter. So as you can see, my mushrooms are nice and brown. And I will add my shallots at this point. And I just cook the shallots for a little bit. And even though it says to use your thyme, to add your thyme at this point, I won't add the thyme until I'm ready to create the sauce. All my fond is all being scraped up off the bottom of the pan, mixed in with the shallots and the mushrooms. At this point, I'll add my flour, and what I'm doing basically is creating a roux. So I'll add my flour and see how this thickens up. If I need more flour, I'll add a little bit more flour. seems to be thickening up. A little bit more flour maybe, and that's enough. Mix it all in. The next thing I need to do, I'm scraping up the fond on the bottom. I need to add my Marsala. So I'm going to add my Marsala. Deglaze the pan. And now I need to simmer and reduce this until it's a nice thick sauce. So I'll be simmering at this point until my sauce is thickened. As you can see, my sauce is thickened very nicely, and I want to shut the heat right now. Stir my sauce a little bit, and then I will add butter to smooth out the sauce. So I'll add 5 tablespoons of butter. The heat is off. I did add my thyme as I was simmering the sauce. And so I have my pasta ready because my pasta had been prepared, and then I mixed the pasta with a little bit of oil and set it aside. So my pasta should be just about ready. See how nice and creamy this sauce is, and I'm sure it's going to be very delicious. So I want to set some sauce aside for my cutlet, for my 2 cutlets. Now I'll add my pasta into the remaining sauce, and I'll just heat it up with the sauce. And we're heating it up. And we're ready to plate. And there's the chicken marsala, ready to eat, and it looks delicious. Well, let's go taste it and see how it is. So see you in the next class, and keep on cooking.
There is a castle on a cloud. I like to go there in my sleep. All tiny floors for